All right, hello everyone. Thanks for calling in. This is this week's Weedley Report, where we discuss the goings-on in the legal cannabis and medicinal marijuana sectors. I would say generally these equities are trading lower, and I've seen some support levels taken out, which is a little concerning if you're a long-term holder because the S&P 500 has really been strong. If you read our Spiders report, you know that we kind of thought that this was going to happen because the prior three times this year that the S&P 500 got to the 2,800 level, it was overbought and it reverted. This time when it got there, it spent some time consolidating and it has moved ahead. And that's generally a sign that a trend will continue if we get to an important support or resistance level and there's consolidation. If it gets there too quickly and it's overbought or oversold, then that's generally the case where we see reversion. If something gets to a level and then works out for a week or two and gets rid of the overboughtness or oversoldness, so to speak, that's an indication that the trend will continue. And you can see that in some of the classic chart patterns like flags and pennants and so forth. So if you're a regular listener, you know my philosophy. I really just look at important levels and trends. I don't use any esoteric technical analysis techniques such as game theory or Elliott waves. To me, that stuff is like UFOs and Bigfoot. It's fun to talk about, but it's hardly credible. And I can tell you in my 2 decades plus of being an institutional trader, I have yet to hear a successful portfolio manager speak about game theory or Elliott waves or Fibonacci ratios or things like that. Speaking of UFOs, I was watching Close Encounters of the Third Kind yesterday. What a great movie, especially the first couple opening scenes. Like, remember where they find the ship in the desert and they find the planes that disappeared from Florida in the desert, and then there's the scene in Iowa, or no, it's Indiana in the control room where they're talking to the planes and the planes are seeing UFOs. It's a really cool movie. If you haven't seen it in a while, I recommend you watch it again. So these are 5 themes and opportunities we focus on over here. First is the widespread social acceptance of cannabis. It's pretty much everywhere. No one really seems to be against it anymore. Some of the stuff it's doing in the medicinal areas is really just amazing with certain types of autism, epilepsy, pain management. Could be used to get people off of this opioid epidemic that's really just tearing the country apart. My younger brother's a police officer, and he basically said on Friday and Saturday nights, he basically just drives around and saves people's lives with his Narcan. So, and in states where there is medicinal marijuana, they have 25% less death rates from opioid overdoses. So there's a correlation there that if someone is in a lot of pain and they take an opioid, they could die. If they take medicinal marijuana, they're not going to die. So you don't really need to be a doctor to see the advantages there. We believe that it's just inevitable that it's going to be legal federally. So we talked about there are opportunities here. This should really be thought of more as a biotech play. And then there is the recreational cannabis play. And then there's the peripheral or ancillary opportunities. And this is what I like to focus on when I'm looking for investment ideas. And I don't mean trading ideas, I mean long-term investment ideas, is what are the other industries that are going to benefit from this? And I like to point out the Levi Strauss example. Like, for instance, if you read about the history of the gold rush, which went on for, say, 5 years, only the people that got there in like the first month made any money. By the time everyone else got there, the gold was all gone and all the sites were taken and so forth and so on. But Levi Strauss comes along, and instead of being a miner, he decides to sell genes to the miners. And whether you're a successful miner or unsuccessful miner, you need genes. So that's a perfect example of a ancillary or peripheral business that boomed off of by catering to a different industry. So what are some peripheral opportunities? Who makes the packaging? Will the police get some kind of breathalyzer that they're going to use? And who makes the parts for that breathalyzer? Who makes these vape things? So forth and so on. Yeah, you get what I mean. All right, so now we're just going to look at Apria. I had pointed out a few weeks ago that this 13 level was important resistance. Once again, it got there, sold off. Now, why is it pinned to this level? How can it get to pretty much exactly 13 and sell over? Well, there could be a big institutional trader there that has I don't know, hundreds of thousands or a million shares for sale, and they just say, stay at 13. They tell their traders, stay at 13 and just sell as much as you can when it gets to 13, but don't sell it any lower. So that kind of puts a ceiling on it. And obviously this opposite is true on the buy side. And you can see that 13 is resistance because it was support here and it was support here. It's also support here. The bottom end of the range has broken at 1130, and that now has become resistance. So going forward, keep watching the 1130 level for resistance here. Okay, this is Aurora Cannabis. You can see this thing is testing its support at the 7 level, but trending lower. Like I said, a lot of these things are trending lower. A little bit oversold, so it might consolidate or take a day or two to break this if it does in fact break. If not, there may be a trade here if you want to, play it if it gets back above this trend line here. It was 7 level with support here and support here. Both these times you can see it got oversold. When I say oversold, I mean it's more than 2 times outside of its, or more than 2 standard deviations outside of its average trading range, which is what happened here and what happened here. See? So this is kind of what I meant before. If it stays here and consolidates and becomes not oversold, then there's a good chance it could go down. Opposite of what happened in the S&P 500 that I mentioned before. This is the Kronos group. You don't really need to be a technician to see that this level is important. $8. On the low side is 550. It's important because it was resistant through February. It was an important low here. And there might be a little trade here too, because you can see it's trading pretty much at exactly the same level that it was in the end of June, and it is a little oversold. And if you could buy this thing at 650 and sell it at 7, maybe you could scalp a couple points there. I don't think it's a long-term trade, but just something to look at. All right, now this is one I mentioned last week for a potential trade, and I actually went long this at 2, and it closed today at 219, which doesn't sound like much, but that's almost 10%. And I know nothing about this company, and it's probably a piece of junk, and it's probably going to zero, as they say in the industry. But here's what I was looking at. This 3 level was important, right? You can see it was support here, it was support here. And when it broke, it got oversold, and I saw it closing in on 2. Now, there's nothing genius about this. We're not curing a virus or trying to figure out the square root of 2. It's just that something goes from 3 to 2. I don't care what sector it's in. There's going to be bottom fishers and people that want to get in on it. It got oversold. It broke its trend line. I bought it at 2. It's up a little bit. My stop out is at 2. So in theory, I won't lose any money, but you don't know because there could be news and it could open up at 1. But if you stick with rules, the odds are work in your favor long term. And if I'm planning on selling it right around 250, and again, it's just a scalp. I know nothing about this company. I assume it's probably going to zero. But who knows? Who knows? I don't want to diminish this company. For all I know, it's a great company. But that doesn't explain why it's gone from 8 to 2 in a matter of a few months. All right, so that is, I'm currently long this position here. So just so you know, in my trading account. All right, this is a potential scalp I was looking at too, because look at this GW Pharmaceuticals, and this is like a real legitimate company with a lot of employees and other businesses besides medicinal marijuana. But you can see the 140 level is important. See how back here it was resistance, here it was resistance, and then we all know resistance becomes support and vice versa. So when it got down here, it got oversold and it was support. But this is what I'm looking at here now. Okay, we're back down to a support level. It's testing support. If this trend line breaks, we could have a trade where you buy it here, say 145, and then sell it up around here, around 152, which is where the most recent high is. Doesn't sound like much, but if this thing does play out, it'll probably play out in a matter of a week or two. So if you do the annualization of that, it's a nice return. But again, you can't try to be a bottom fisher. And I see smart people do it. I see stupid people do it. I see professional smart people do it. I see professional stupid people do it. And there's a lot more of them in this industry than you would believe. Trust me, I've worked with a bunch of them. So here's the thing: you catch it on the way up. Have rules, like I say, and your rule for entry is wait for this trend line to break. Because in theory, if the downtrend breaks, it's either going to go sideways or you're going to break even, or it's going to revert and go up, and then you're going to be entering it. So from a risk reward perspective, it's much better to wait to buy it on the upswing. If you try to buy it at this level, 140, and this thing keeps going down, you're just going to get run over. And I see that happen all the time. That's one of the most common trading mistakes that people make, is trying to catch the exact bottom or the exact top. And that's really done more due to a human psychological desire to prove oneself smart or correct than to think about making money. I mean, if you think about it, the reason why all these quantitative funds have done so well is because they don't have emotions. So you can program in a rule like that, and the computer is going to do it without questioning it. A human being is going to try to prove that they're smart and so forth and so on. And who knows, I guess with all this artificial intelligence and so forth, maybe computers will eventually try to prove that they're smart. That's a story for another time. All right, here's the Horizons ETF. You can see this thing broke its support at 13. So now I would suspect 13 to be a resistance level. Longer term, if it rallies, you can see pretty much the exact high at 15. Back here in March was the high. So longer term, if you're long this thing, keep an eye on the resistance at 13. Well, that's in the shorter term. The longer term is keep an eye on the resistance at 15. Short term 13, long term 15. All right. All right, now here, this is innovative industrial properties. You can see that we were watching, we talked about this last week, this 34.75 level, which was, the top around here and the top here through early May. So this broke, and lo and behold, now it's a resistance level. I'm watching 32.50 for the support because it was the bottom of the range back here. So 34.75 resistance, 32.50 support. All right, here's Kush bottles. I love that name, Kush. That's from the Kush Mountains in Mexico, where a lot of supposedly high quality marijuana comes from. Not that I would know, wink, wink. Just kidding. I really have no idea. But anyway, this is the thing I was talking about. These ancillary industries is, I assume these guys are making bottles that they store marijuana in. So this is a business that's going to sell to the gold miners, so to speak, sell the genes to the gold miners and not try to mine the gold. I think generally the companies that are valued due to having a lot of cannabis or marijuana, the actual plant, the market is completely going to be glutted. I read that in Canada, to fulfill all of the needs for the cannabis markets, they need about 8 million square feet of growing space, and they have 11 million. So, all these people want to be pot farmers, but the prices are going to be down dramatically. And I already know that they have been, because I even read that pounds of marijuana out in Washington or Oregon are going for $50, whereas 4 or 5 years ago they were going for thousands of dollars. So again, that's a reason to be looking for ideas in the ancillary industries. So we can see here, obviously, the 450 level is important. And this is a real company too, right? There's real institutionals, holders in it, some real brokers follow it. So, my guess is there's a good chance that there's someone out there that said, if I could buy this thing at 450, I'm going to buy it. I'm going to tell my traders to make a stand. And what that means in trader lingo is buy it at 450, make a stand, keep your bid there. Don't try to buy it lower. Don't cancel your bid and move it down to 440 or 4. Just make a stand. And when I was a trader, that's one of the things that used to really get me aggravated, because if you're a buy-side trader, and that's a trader who's at a hedge fund or an investment advisor, you should know more than the guys about your stocks than the sell side does. Now, when I say buy and sell side, that's really just a slang term. Buy side is firms that pay commissions to get trades done, like mutual funds or hedge funds or investment advisors. If they trade with a broker, they have to pay a commission. Sell side firm is a firm that gets a commission for doing a trade. So a broker dealer is sell side. So I would know more about these. Like, for instance, say my company was a holder of this, I might get a call from someone that says, hey, listen, I'm a huge buyer of this thing. We're going to go at 440 for 1,000,000 shares, which means they'll pay a 440 bid for 1,000,000 shares. In trader talk, at least in the old school days, you always put, if you're buying, you put the price first and the shares second. And if you're selling, you put the shares first and the price second. Like, for instance, if you wanted to buy 1,000,000 shares at 450, you say 450 for 1,000,000. If you want to sell 1,000,000 shares at 450, you say 1,000,000 at 450. But anyway, say theoretically, and it wasn't really theoretical, it was probably 90% of the time, I knew more about what was going on in our stocks than the sell side did, because that's my job. I get to talk to all the sell side firms and find out what they're all doing. The sell side firms don't talk to each other because they're all rivals with each other, so they don't want to reveal to each other what they're doing. So say in theory, I get a call that there's a 440 buyer for 1,000,000 and another 440 buyer for 2,000,000 and so forth and so on. Now I'm sitting here thinking, eventually these buyers are going to get impatient and pay up. So they might say, all right, well, forget 440, I'm going to go out and buy it at 450. So me knowing these buyers are there, I would tell the broker, make a stand, be it 450, just make a stand. And I'll tell you, no matter how many times you told them to do that, they always try to, not always, the good guys wouldn't, but the brokers that you had to trade with that sucked because your boss had some kind of relationship with them. They just overthink it, and they think like, oh, gee, well, I could buy it at 449. Well, guess what? You might back up to 449, and then the guys at 440 say, guess what? I'm going to 450. They might trade a block, and you completely missed it because your broker thinks that they're smart trying to fight for an extra penny. So anyway, just a little life on the Wall Street thing there. Life on Wall Street. That's what some of the issues I used to have to deal with every day. All right, this is Med Relief. I wish I could have made some money on this thing because I pointed out last week how choppy action is bearish, and you can see since then, this is right where we talked about it. It's gone from 31 down to like 25. So, generally when you see this really choppy action like that, it's a bearish indication. It just has to do with the supply and demand dynamics. And, it's at I guess you could call this a support level. 2475 was resistance here. And see, this is where the low is right here. I'm getting too much highlighter here. So it's right where it bottomed a few weeks ago. So who knows, maybe it'll bounce. But personally, I would stay away from this one, but I've been wrong before. All right, Scott's Miracle Grow. This is a good thing to show people that don't believe in so-called technical analysis. Clearly, there is resistance at 87.50. We even mentioned this back then. And look, I haven't even looked at this stock in like a month, and sure enough, 87.50 is right where it turned. And on the low side, 79.50 is support. So it's testing support right there, and it is not oversold like it was here and was here. So who knows, maybe this thing breaks and goes lower. But if I was going to go long this thing, I would wait to see how it plays out. If I was going to sell it, I don't know, probably flip a coin. But you may want to sell it here because if this 79.50 level breaks and you wait a month, you could be selling it at a lot lower of a price. All right, Canopy Growth, weed, love the symbols. You can see 42 longer term is resistance. It's kind of trading right at this 33.50 level, which was resistance all through here. A little bit of support here. So it's building a support level at 33.50. All right, so just some things to consider if you're trading these things. Keep an eye on the Canadian dollar and US dollar exchange rate because a lot of these things are in Canada. You're going to trade the ADR or the primary. You need to consider the liquidity. I mean, if you're an institution, you need to consider liquidity. There's probably enough liquidity for your typical day trader or retail trader to not have to worry about it. But some of these things, if you needed to acquire 1,000,000 shares or so, like you just couldn't do it. There's just not enough volume there, and there's no one to sell it to or buy it from because there's no other institutional investors. Some of them there are, but these markets are still kind of young, but they are starting to develop. And now that they're developing trading histories, as we just saw, there's important support and resistance levels are starting to develop. Here's a look at the dollar, the US dollar, Canadian dollar, kind of been trading right around here. So not too much going on there. All right, so that's it for this week. I guess keep your head up, and hopefully you can make some money this week, and I will talk with you next week. Thank you, everybody. Have a good day.